In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up JUnit testing in an IntelliJ project. So I have a simple main class here. We can see that it's in my source tree under main. And what I want to do is first set up a testing directory. So I'm going to go to the topmost folder here and I'm going to say new, add a directory. And I'm going to call that directory test in all lowercase. And so you can see I now have a test directory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Project Structure, and in my modules, you'll see here's this test directory, and I'm going to mark that directory as being a test source folder. So I'm telling IntelliJ that, hey, when you create tests, this is a good place to put them, that I'd rather keep my source code and my tests separate. Having done that, I'm now going to turn my attention to my code. So in this main function, I can call with a series of arguments, and what it's going to look for is whether all of the arguments begin with A. And so I have an initial Boolean, I'm going to set it to true, and then I have a loop that loops through each of the arguments in turn and reads the first character of the argument and checks to see is it not lowercase a and not uppercase A. And if so, it's going to set this Boolean to false. So this Boolean is a one-way flag. It's going to start true. We're going to conditionally set it to false. Once I've set it to false, there's no more work I need to do in the loop because I'm never going to set it back to true. And then based on whether the Boolean is true or false, I'm going to print out a message at the end. So this code in some way has some similarities to the code that you're writing, and in fact the thing that's challenging about it is it's not particularly easy to test on its own right, that we would have to pass in arguments and then somehow look at the system out stream to look to see what was printing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to refactor this code, then I'm going to pull out this code that computes, that does the analysis from the code that's doing the output. So I've highlighted that code, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click that or go to the refactoring menu, and from refactoring I'm going to go to extract, and from extract I'm going to go to method. So I'm going to extract a method, and that brings up this dialog, and it can ask me a bunch of things about the function. In fact, do I want it private or public? In this case, I'm happy. Well, let's go ahead and make it public because that'll make it easier to test. I can input a name. If I'm happy with the default name, I can just leave that alone, and it's going to show me what the function prototype looks like. And I'm happy with that, so I say OK. You can see that it's pulled that code out of the main function and replaced it with an invocation of this function that just created. And so here's that function it just created. There's some inefficiencies now that this is a separate function. I perhaps don't want to have this Boolean at all. That maybe what I can do is instead, if I get to this point, I can just return false, in which case down here I can simply return true, meaning that I can remove this Boolean entirely. So I've simplified my code a little by pulling that function out. But now I'm in a position where this function is much easier to test. Okay, having refactored the code, I'm now ready to go and make a test for this function. So what I can do is I can select this first line of the function and use the goTo function to go to the test, and it says, oh, I can't find a test for this, would you like me to create a new test? And so I'm going to say yes. And at this point we can pick which of the standard Java test libraries. We're going to use JUnit4. It says the library is not found in this current module, and so I can tell it to fix by using the one that's built into the IntelliJ distribution. And that seems an appropriate thing to do. I want to test the main function, the main class, so it's going to generate a class called main test. I could rename it if I want. It doesn't have a super name. It's going to use the same package. And I want it to generate test methods for, well, I don't want to test the main method again because we said that would be a pain, but let's go ahead and have it automatically generate a test method for the is all beginning with a function. So it did that. You'll notice that this is in my test directory, so I now have this class called main test with the same package. What we need to do now is add code into this empty test function in order to get it to exercise the function. So what we're going to do is we're going to make calls to two functions. One's called assert true, and these are going to be test cases where we're going to invoke the main function. So for my invocation of is a beginning with a that I want to return true, I need to construct an input to pass into that function, and we know that function takes an array of strings, and so I'll create an array of strings with strings that all begin with a, either capital A's or lowercase a's. Similarly, I can test conditions where the code should return the value false, and I'm going to do that in the same way, but instead I want to pass it a bad input where the input's a collection of strings where not all of the inputs start with a, and in that case we expect the value to return false, and so we want to assert that the output is false. Once we have these test cases in place, we can invoke we can run the testers. By selecting run, it gives us the opportunity to say, do you want to run, what do you want to run? So we're going to say we want to run main test. It'll run the test. This will compile the code and run the tests, and in this case you can see all the tests are green, so that means it succeeded. That if instead we gave it what we thought was a good input and the code was broken, if we go and break the code, for example, if we return false in this case, we can rerun the tests, and we can see that now we're getting one failing test, and it gives us some idea of where it's failing. When we should have gotten true on this line, we instead got it a false, and so we need to go fix our code to make that test pass. So if we want to add additional tests to this function, we can use the code generate function to generate another test method, and that'll give us the right signature for the test method. So it's okay to have multiple assertions within a given test, but you shouldn't put all of your tests in one test, because then when that test fails, you have to do a lot more work to figure out why that test failed. So maybe we could have a test for false tests of that function. And we can put our ones that are supposed to generate false conditions in that test case. And so now when we run our test cases, we see we now have two test cases that it's running, and they're both passing.